Okay, Wildcats. Today we're looking at Tuesday, February 26th, attributes of rational functions on page 57. If you would, update your table of contents. All right, now your table of contents are updated. Let's take a look at your examples. All right, attributes of rational functions on page 57. Find the zeros, vertical asymptotes, horizontal asymptotes, and holes. All right, now the first thing you need to do is you need to factor the numerator and denominator. Well, the denominator, there's nothing to factor, so it's just x minus 1. But the numerator looks like you can factor out a 4, which leaves x minus 3. Sorry, a little camera adjustment there. Now, if there was a holes, this would divide and become 1. Since that doesn't happen, there are no holes. All right. Now, for the zeros, you set the numerator equal to 0. So 4x minus 12 equal to 0. Well, you add 12 to both sides, so you get 4x equals 12. Divide 4 by both sides, x equals 3. That means you have a 0 at 3, 0. All right. Now, for the vertical asymptote, you set the denominator equal to 0. So, x minus 1 equal to 0. So, add 1 to both sides, x equals 1. All right. Now, for the horizontal or slant asymptote, you divide here. So, you have 4x minus 12 divided by x minus 1. All right. So now you ask yourself, well, what do you multiply x by to give you 4x? Well, the answer to that is 4. Now, once you've gotten here, you stop. This is your quotient. This is your dividend. Now, you don't have to do the full division. Once you get the quotient, then you can stop, and then you have your slant asymptote, which in this case is y equals 4. All right, so finish up example 1. All right, now let's take a look at example 2. So again, the first thing you do is factor the numerator and denominator. Well, there's nothing really you can factor in the numerator, so you have 2x. This factors as x minus 2 and x plus 2. Because it's the difference of squares. X squared is x times x. Negative 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. Now, nothing divides and becomes 1, so there's no holes. All right, now for the zeros, you set the numerator equal to 0, so 2x equal to 0. Well, real simple, we divide by 2, x equals 0. All right, now for the vertical asymptote, you set the denominator equal to 0. So in this case, x minus 2 equal to 0, and x plus 2 equal to 0. So your vertical asymptotes are x equals 2 and x equals negative 2. All right, now for the horizontal asymptote, you divide 2x by x squared minus 4, so x squared minus 4 divided into 2x. Now, but I need to put a 0x squared here, because whenever you divide, you need to represent all the powers. All right, so then you ask yourself, well, what do you multiply x squared to give you 0x squared? The answer is 0. You have the quotient, so your slant asymptote is y equals 0. And I should say, in this case, it's actually a horizontal asymptote because it's y equals, and so is this. This is a horizontal asymptote at y equals. I know I said slant, but y equals 4 is a horizontal line at 4, and y equals 0 is a horizontal line at 0, so it's a horizontal asymptote. In order for it to be a slant asymptote, you need an x, and then in this case, you don't have either, okay? All right, so let's take a look at example 3. All right. Now here, first thing you want to do is factor the numerator and denominator. So we know 2 parentheses, x and x. Now we need to find all the combinations to make negative 6 and combine to be 1. So we have 1 times negative 6 is negative 6. 1 minus 6 is negative 5. That doesn't work. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. 1 minus 3 is negative 2. That doesn't work. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. 3 minus 2 is 1. That works. Our factors are 3 and negative 2. So x plus 3x minus 2. Now notice that I'm going to put the x minus 2 underneath the x minus 2. Now, anything divided by itself is 1. So x minus 2 divided by x minus 2 is equal to 1. Thus, we now have a whole. So we said x minus 2 equal to 0 and solve. So x equals 2. Now, when you get a whole, it's an actual point. Okay? So now you need to plug 2 back into the equation. So f of 2 equals. Now, you're not going to plug it into here. You're going to plug it into the x plus 3 because this divides and becomes 1. So you're going to put the 2 into the x plus 3. So 2 plus 3 equals 5. So you have a whole at 2, 5. All right. Now for the zeros, you set the numerator equal to 0, but in this case, you only set what's left, because remember, this divided become 1, so we set x plus 3 equals to 0. So subtract 3 from both sides, x equals negative 3. All right. Now, the vertical asymptote is when we set the denominator equal to 0. Well, here's the problem. There is no denominator because this body becomes 1, so there are no vertical asymptotes. Okay. Now, here's the thing. To find a horizontal or slant asymptote, you divide the numerator by the denominator, but here's the thing, the denominator is just 1, so there are no horizontal asymptotes. And no slant asymptotes. Okay. All right, so now let's take a look at example 4. All right, so the first thing you want to do is factor the numerator and denominator. So 2 parentheses, x and x. Now, what we need to do is find out what combinations make 12 and combine to be 5. So we do 1 times 12 is 12. 1 plus 12 is 13. That doesn't work. 2 times 6 is 12. 2 plus 6 is 8. That doesn't work. 3 times 4 equals 12. 3 plus 4 is 7. That works. So our factors are 3 and 4. So x plus 3x plus 4. Now notice that nothing divides and becomes 1, so there are no holes. All right, so the zeros, you set the numerator equal to 0, so x plus 3 equal to 0, and x plus 4 equal to 0. So x equals -3 and x equals -4. And I forgot to do it in here, but you really need to write it as a 0. So -3, 0 and -4, 0. So here we should write this as -3, 0. All right, now for the vertical asymptote, you set the denominator equal to 0, so x minus 1 equal to 0. So x equals 1. Now, the reason why it's important that you write the zeros as points because the vertical asymptote is x equals. So when you say x equals, you're implying that this is a vertical asymptote, so you have to write it as a point when it's a 0. Okay? All right. Now for a horizontal slant asymptote, we divide x minus 1 into x squared plus 7x plus 12. So they ask yourself, well, what do you multiply x by to give you x squared? The answer to that is 1x. Now, the moment you get an x here, you automatically know it's a slant asymptote. Okay? That's why I misspoke when I said that these were slant asymptotes, because there's no x. If there's no x here, then it's a horizontal asymptote. Okay? But here, when you get x in the quotient, then it's automatically a slant asymptote. Okay? Now, x times x is x squared. X times -1 is -1x. But remember, when you divide, you subtract here, so that's minus plus cancels, you're left with 8x plus 12. Well, you ask yourself, what do you multiply 1x by to give you 8x? The answer to that is plus 8. You stop. Once the quotient is completed, you have your slant asymptote, which is y equals x plus 8. And again, that's a slant asymptote because the quotient included an x. When the quotient doesn't include x, it's a horizontal asymptote. All right, if you would finish up your examples and start working on your assignment, and have a wonderful Wildcat day.